The moment I walked through the front door and saw my daughter sitting on the hallway floor with her knees pulled to her chest, I knew something had broken inside this house, and it wasn't going to be easy to fix. She was 9 years old and she was trying so hard not to cry. Her little brother, 6, was sitting next to her with his favorite dinosaur stuffed animal, clutched against his chest, his eyes red and swollen. Neither of them said anything when I walked in. They just looked at me with that particular expression children make when they've learned too early that the adults in their lives aren't always safe. "Baby, what happened?" I crouched down in front of them, still smiz my scrubs, still smelling like the hospital, my bag sliding off my shoulder onto the floor. My daughter, she's always been the one to hold things together, even when she shouldn't have to. She looked past me toward the hallway that led to the back bedrooms. "Grandma moved our stuff," she said quietly. I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe she meant rearranged, maybe shuffled something around to make room for a new bookshelf or something. I was tired. I'd just finished a 10-hour shift at the clinic where I worked as a physician assistant. My brain wasn't working at full speed. "Moved your stuff where, sweetheart?" She pointed down, toward the basement door. I stood up slowly. I walked to their bedroom, the room that had been theirs for the past 14 months, since we'd moved back in with my parents after my divorce. The room with the butterfly decals on the wall that my daughter had picked out herself. The room with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that my son and I had stuck up there one Saturday afternoon, while my daughter was at a friend's house. Their beds were gone. Their dressers were gone. The butterfly decals were still there, but everything else, the books, the toys, the little lamp shaped like a cloud that my son couldn't sleep without, all of it was gone. In its place were 2 brand new suitcases, still tagged from the store, a folded-up pregnancy pillow still in its packaging, a printed itinerary sitting on the windowsill with my sister-in-law's name on it. My brother and his wife were moving back from Seattle, and apparently, they needed the room. I stood there for a long moment. Then I walked to the basement door and opened it. The air that hit me was damp and cold, and smelled like old carpet and something else I didn't want to identify. My son's cloud lamp was sitting on a cardboard box at the bottom of the stairs. My daughter's books were in a laundry basket shoved against the wall. Their mattresses, both of them, were propped up against the concrete wall next to the hot water heater. My son had been diagnosed with asthma the previous spring. The pulmonologist had specifically told us he needed to sleep in a room with good airflow and low humidity. I had mentioned this to my parents at the time. My mother had nodded and said she understood. I came back upstairs. My parents were in the kitchen. My father was reading some things on his tablet. My mother was at the stove, stirring something that smelled like pot roast. It was a completely ordinary Tuesday evening except for the fact that my children's bedroom had been dismantled and their things had been moved to an unfinished basement without anyone asking me. "Mom," I said. She didn't turn around right away. "Dinner's almost ready, Mom. You moved the kids' stuff to the basement." She set down her spoon and turned around with an expression I recognized. It was the expression she'd been wearing my entire life whenever I was about to raise a concern she'd already decided wasn't valid. Patient. Slightly pained. Like I was the one being unreasonable. "We need that room for your brother," she said. "You know he and Laurel are coming back. She's almost 7 months along and she needs space. Those twins are going to need a proper nursery. The twins aren't born yet. My children live here right now. Your children can sleep downstairs for a few weeks," my father said without looking up from his tablet. "A few weeks?" I looked at him. "Dad, he doesn't have a job lined up here yet. Laurel isn't working. How long is a few weeks?" "However long they need," my mother said, and her voice had gone flat in a way that meant the conversation was over as far as she was concerned. "He's going through a hard time. He gave up a lot to come back here and support this family." I almost laughed. I almost actually laughed out loud in my mother's kitchen, standing next to the pot roast. My brother had given up a lot. My brother, who had a master's degree and had been making 6 figures in Seattle. My brother, whose wife came from money and whose parents-in-law were helping fund their move back. My brother, who had never once, not one single time in his adult life, been asked to scale back, slow down, compromise, or make do. Meanwhile, I was a divorced mother of two working full-time with my kids this meant next to a hot water heater and a humidity problem. And apparently that was fine. I didn't say any of that. I went back to the hallway where my kids were still sitting on the floor, sat down between them, and put my arms around both of them. "You're not sleeping down there," I told them. "I promise." My daughter leaned her head against my shoulder. My son tucked himself under my arm. "Mom," he said quietly, "why does Uncle Bennett matter more than us?" And I didn't have an answer for him. Because the true answer was something I'd been carefully not looking at for years. The way you don't look directly at something that would hurt too much to see clearly. The truth was that he always had. In my family, my brother had always mattered more. It was the water we swam in. It was so normal we didn't have a name for it. My brother got the car at 16. I got a bus pass. My brother's college was fully funded. I took out loans and worked 30 hours a week my junior and senior years. When I got my PA certification, my parents took me to dinner at Applebee's. When my brother got his master's, they threw a party and flew in relatives from 3 states away. I'd made peace with most of it, or I'd told myself I had. But this was different. This wasn't about me anymore. I made a decision that night, sitting on the hallway floor with my children. I didn't announce it. I didn't make a speech. I just decided. The next morning, before my shift, I called my friend Yolanda, who was a real estate agent. She'd been offering to help me find a place for over a year, since before the divorce was even final. Every time she'd brought it up, I'd said I wasn't ready, that the kids needed stability, that it was easier to stay put while things settled down. What I'd really been afraid of was the money. My divorce had not been kind to my finances. My ex-husband and I had split everything down the middle, which sounded fair until you realized that everything included the debt from the years he'd spent in and out of unemployment while I carried us. I'd come out of it with a decent credit score and not much else. But I'd been working steadily for 14 months. I'd paid off one of my credit cards. I had a small savings account that had been growing slowly and quietly, like something I was almost afraid to look at in case it disappeared. Yolanda didn't ask questions. She just said, "Okay, let's go look at some things this weekend." I didn't tell my parents. I told them I was taking the kids to visit a friend. We looked at 4 places that Saturday. The third one, a 3-bedroom rental in a neighborhood with a good elementary school, a backyard with an actual fence, hardwood floors, and a second-floor bathroom that got real afternoon light. Felt like something I'd been holding my breath for without realizing it. It was $300 more a month than I'd been paying my parents in rent. It was going to be tight. I said yes anyway. The lease was set to start in 6 weeks. I came home that afternoon, and my brother and sister-in-law had arrived. They'd driven from Seattle. A 2-day drive, and they pulled in right as we were getting out of the car. My sister-in-law was visibly pregnant, beautiful in that unself-conscious way she'd always been, wearing a linen dress and sunglasses, laughing at something on her phone. My brother hugged me. He seemed genuinely happy to see me, which is the thing about my brother. He's never been deliberately cruel. He's just never had to think about the space he takes up. No one ever made him. "This is going to be so good," he said, one hand clapping my shoulder. "All of us together again." "Yeah," I said. "Sure." That evening, my mother announced at dinner that she and my father had decided my brother and sister-in-law would take the master bedroom. I set my fork down. "Where are you two sleeping?" I asked. "We'll take the guest room," my mother said. "That's 5 adults, 2 children, and 1 room that currently has my kids' belongings in it and 2 more rooms occupied," I said, doing the math out loud. "Where exactly do you think we fit in this?" "We thought you could set up more permanently in the basement," my father said. "Make it comfortable. We can get a dehumidifier." My sister-in-law looked briefly uncomfortable. She opened her mouth slightly and then closed it again. My brother was staring at his plate. "A dehumidifier? For my asthmatic 6-year-old? "No," I said. My mother looked at me. "Excuse me?" "No, my son has asthma. I'm not putting him in a basement." I picked my fork back up. "We'll figure something out." The something I had already figured out. I just didn't say so. What I didn't expect was what happened 3 weeks later. My mother sat me down one Saturday morning. The kids were at a neighbor's house. My brother and sister-in-law had gone to a prenatal appointment, and she told me that she and my father had been talking, and they thought it would be fair if I contributed more to the household. I asked her what more meant. She had a number. It was not a small number. It was, in fact, $350 more per month than I was currently paying, which would have made my rent to them higher than the lease I'd already signed for the new place. "Things are tight with your brother not working yet," she explained. "And the baby's coming. We need to prepare." I looked at my mother for a long moment. She looked back at me with that patient, slightly pained expression. "I'll think about it," I said. That was a Thursday. The lease started the following Saturday. I spent the next 9 days. I packed when the kids were at school. I used boxes from the liquor store around the corner, and I stacked them in my car, in the trunk in the back seat, carefully. Every morning before my parents woke up, I transferred the kids' school enrollment. I called the electric company. I set up mail forwarding. My daughter knew. She figured it out around day 4 when she noticed the cloud lamp wasn't in the basement anymore. She looked at me with her serious 9-year-old eyes and said, "We're moving, aren't we?" "We are," I said. "To somewhere good?" "To somewhere really good," I said. "There's a backyard." She nodded slowly, considering this. Then, "When?" "Saturday." She kept the secret like a professional. She didn't tell her brother until Friday night when I finally sat them both down and explained everything. My son immediately wanted to know if his dinosaur collection could have its own shelf. I said yes. He seemed satisfied. Saturday morning I woke up early. The kids were still asleep. I made coffee and sat in the kitchen of my parents' house for the last time, in the early light before anyone else was up, and I tried to figure out what I was feeling. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't anger, exactly. Even though the anger was still there underneath everything, like a low hum I'd learned to live with. It was something more tired than that. Grief, maybe, for a version of my family I'd wanted so badly to exist that I'd kept pretending it did long after I should have known better. My parents had a will. My grandmother, my mother's mother, who'd died 2 years before, had left a specific amount to be divided equally between my mother's children. That meant my mother, and it meant my Aunt Carolyn, who lived in Florida. Both of them had children of their own, and the way my grandmother had structured it, the inheritance was meant to pass along to the grandchildren as well. My mother had told me, after the estate was settled, that there was money set aside for me. $45,000. I had never seen it. When I'd asked about it during the divorce proceedings, my attorney had flagged it as a potential asset. My mother had said it was tied up in the estate still. That had been 18 months ago. I'd asked once more, gently, about 4 months after moving in. My father had said they were managing it responsibly, and that I'd receive it when the time was right. The time, apparently, had never been right. I had an appointment with an estate attorney on Monday. My neighbor's husband was a probate lawyer, and he'd already looked at the documents I had copies of. The will, the executor filings, the distribution letters, and he'd told me, carefully and clearly, that what my parents were doing was not legal. An executor has a fiduciary responsibility. Withholding a beneficiary's inheritance to redirect it to another family member is a breach of that responsibility. It can be a felony. I hadn't told my parents any of this. I loaded the last boxes into my car while my parents slept. I put the kids in the back seat with their backpacks and their favorite things. My daughter had her sketchbook. My son had his dinosaur. I left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "I found a place. We're moving out today. I hope things go well with the babies." Me. I did not say goodbye. I did not leave a forwarding address. I did not have a dramatic conversation in the doorway where everyone said things they'd regret. I just left. The new place smelled like fresh paint and old wood floors and possibility. My son ran straight through the house to the back door to look at the yard. My daughter stood in the middle of the living room and turned in a slow circle, looking at the ceiling, the windows, the light. "It's nice," she said, with the careful understatement of someone who's learned not to want things too loudly. "It's ours," I said. She looked at me. Then she smiled. A real one, the kind she didn't give out easily, and ran down the hall to claim her bedroom. My mother called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. She called twice more. I listened to the messages later, after the kids were in bed. The first one was confused. The second one was upset. The third one started with the words, "You need to think about what you're doing to this family." And I stopped listening. I texted her, "We're safe. Kids are good. I'll be in touch." I didn't hear back for 4 days. What I heard instead, through my Aunt Carolyn in Florida, who called me on Wednesday, was that my brother and sister-in-law had discovered, on the first morning after we'd left, that they no longer had anyone to cook for them, clean up after them, do the dishes, run errands, or manage the 100 small domestic tasks that I had apparently been absorbing as part of what my parents considered me paying my fair share. They also discovered, shortly thereafter, that the rental property 2 streets over, the small house my parents had bought 15 years ago as an investment, the one I'd been told was occupied by long-term tenants, had in fact been vacant for 8 months. My parents had been collecting rent on it through a property management company, and the money had been going into a joint account that my brother had access to. I didn't know that part until my aunt told me. The estate attorney was thorough. She was also, it turned out, not particularly surprised by any of what I brought her. She said she saw this kind of situation more than people would expect. An inheritance held in limbo, reasons given and reasons changed, time passing, the beneficiary made to feel guilty for asking. She filed the demand letter within the week. My father called me the day after the letter arrived. He was angry in that cold, quiet way that had always scared me when I was a child. He said I was being vindictive. He said I was hurting my mother. He says my brother was already under enough stress without this. I waited until he was finished. Then I said, "Dad, I'm not doing this to hurt anyone. I'm doing this because that money is mine and my children need it. That's all this is." He hung up. 3 weeks later, my parents' attorney reached out to my attorney. They were prepared to discuss a settlement. The inheritance took another 2 months to fully resolve. There were documents and phone calls, and one very uncomfortable hour-long mediation session where my mother cried and my father stared at the wall, and I sat with my hands folded on the table and kept my voice completely steady. I got the money. All of it. I used $30,000 of it as a down payment on a house. It's a 4-bedroom, which felt like an absurd luxury until I realized it meant my kids each got their own room for the first time in their lives. My daughter put her art supplies in one corner of hers. My son set up his dinosaur collection on 3 shelves, 3 full shelves, and made me come look at it with the gravity of someone unveiling a museum exhibit. "Do you like it?" he asked. "I love it," I said. The house has a yard with a maple tree in the corner. Most evenings, if I'm home in time, I sit on the back steps with a cup of coffee and watch them run around in the fading light. My daughter chasing my son, both of them laughing too loud for the neighborhood. And I think about the night I found them sitting on the hallway floor in my parents' house with their knees pulled to their chests. My mother and I talk now. It's careful and it's not warm, not the way it used to be before I understood what it had really cost me to keep pretending everything was fine. But we talk. She came to see the house once and stood in the living room and didn't say much, and on her way out she paused at the door and said, "You've done well." It was the most she could give me. I understood that. I used to need more than that from her. I don't anymore. My brother's twins were born in November. Healthy, loud, beautiful, I've seen pictures. He and my sister-in-law are renting their own place now. It turns out when you remove the person who was quietly holding everything together, things get sorted out a lot faster. I don't regret a single box I packed. I don't regret the note I left on the counter, or the quiet Saturday morning exit, or the attorney, or the mediation, or any of it. What I regret is the years I spent making myself smaller so my family would feel comfortable. The mornings I woke up in their house and reminded myself to be grateful. The number of times I swallowed something true, because saying it out loud didn't seem worth the cost. My daughter is 10 now. She has her own room with her art on the walls and a window that faces east so she gets morning light. Last week she showed me a drawing she'd made. Our house, the maple tree, the 2 of us and her brother in the yard. She'd labeled it home in careful block letters at the bottom. That word in her handwriting is the only revenge I ever actually wanted.